America did not hear the order. It felt it. A tightening under the skin of the country, like something heavy had just been moved into place out of sight. By the time the DEFCON level actually shifted to 1, the signal paths meant to carry that fact were already breaking. In Washington, D.C., the first sign was not sirens or speeches. It was emptiness. Cable news channels froze mid-sentence, anchors caught with eyes half closed, then dissolved into flat grey and white snow. Office TVs in federal buildings showed the same pattern. An entire city watching screens lose their picture in the same 4 seconds. For the first time in decades, people saw real static, not a test card. In Virginia, near the Pentagon and along the corridor of federal facilities, phones lost time. Notifications arrived in clumps, with the wrong order stamps. A 58-year-old man in Alexandria stood in his kitchen, coffee cooling in his hand, watching his news app spin. The warmth of the mug had gone before the page ever loaded. Outside, the low air carried a smell of distant smoke without a visible fire. Across the river in Maryland, and down through Fairfax and Arlington, certain sirens spoke out of turn. Old civil defense systems, tied into misreading sensors and half-cut lines, pushed out tones linked to radiation alerts. In one town, residents went straight to basements, grabbing bottled water and radios. 10 miles away, in another, people stepped into the street instead, staring at the sky, demanding to know who had triggered the alarm. No one had a clear answer. The same word, radiation, echoed with 2 opposite reactions. On the far side of the country, California felt the shift through its wiring. Power grids designed around precision started to stutter as satellite links blinked off and rerouted traffic. In San Jose and Los Angeles, lights flickered in data centers, then steadied on backup. In neighborhoods around them, street lamps browned, brightened, then failed. A 63-year-old engineer in the Bay Area opened a panel in his garage and flipped breakers out of habit, knowing it would not touch the real problem. In Colorado, the air over the Front Range grew busy with unseen activity. NORAD's mountain complex moved toward deeper isolation, cutting non-essential lines to preserve what remained. On the civilian side, that looked like sudden silence. A 65-year-old nurse in Colorado Springs pulled an old Cold War-era dosimeter from a drawer and tapped it, listening to the tired mechanical click instead of trusting anything on a screen. New York did not fall quiet. It sharpened. Horns stopped, but footsteps sped up. Conversations clipped themselves. Subway cars stalled in tunnels for seconds that felt like minutes. News tickers in Times Square froze on half-phrases. Then, from somewhere in the tangle of backup systems, a short-burst transmission reached a few radios and emergency receivers. Avoid Hudson, and then nothing. Avoid the river? The bridges? The tunnels? Within half an hour, 3 different versions of the warning were circulating. Some said to stay away from Lower Manhattan. Others swore ferries had been halted because of contamination. A third rumor insisted something was moving up the river itself. Each version sent a different flow of people in a different direction, away from the water, toward it, or straight into gridlock. On highways around all 5 regions, vehicles surged, then stalled, then simply stopped. Not from impact, but from indecision. Crowds swelled on overpasses and in parking lots, then went silent. Whole blocks in D.C. and Richmond switched off their own lights, houses dimming in sequence as if on a single unseen circuit. Above it all, coastal and inland skies carried shapes too distant to classify: contrails, debris trails, patrols. To the ground, they were only shadows sliding between clouds. Radios hissed with broken phrases: loss of contact, unknown damage, repeat, unable to confirm. Then, sometime past the point when people stopped checking the clock, a new sound arrived. It was not a blast. It was a low, uneven hum spreading across wide air, as if some huge engine had been opened up far away and never fully throttled down. Windows vibrated lightly. Dishes rattled in cupboards. The country was not falling yet. It was tilting, slowly, away from what it had been. The tilt showed up first as gridlock that had no clear cause. In Northern Virginia, the low hum in the sky turned into brake lights on I-95 and I-395. Lanes filled, then stopped, not because of wrecks, but because people could not decide whether they should still be going to work. Cars idled on overpasses above the Potomac, radios hissing half-sentences from DHS and FEMA. A few drivers tried to turn around across the median and froze halfway, suddenly aware there was nowhere obvious to go. Exit ramps toward the Pentagon and federal complexes moved in inches. Families who had left early to get out ahead of things found themselves trapped beside commuters who hadn't yet admitted the day was over. The air vibrated with engines and occasional low military flights. Every time a grey fuselage crossed the sky, heads ducked reflexively. In neighbourhoods near Arlington and Alexandria, people began doing small, practical things with an edge of urgency. Filling bathtubs, pulling cash from drawers, checking old flashlights. A 49-year-old woman in Richmond loaded suitcases into her trunk, closing the lid, then standing still in the driveway. She had no destination yet, only a sense that staying put felt wrong. On the West Coast, California's answer came in the form of backup systems switching on. Substations outside Sacramento and Fresno growled to life as reserves kicked in, trying to cover for lost capacity farther south. For a few minutes, lights brightened, refrigerators hummed again, elevators moved between floors. People exhaled. Then a fault on a damaged line in the Sacramento Valley sparked a chain reaction. A relay failed, a transformer blew, and a curtain of orange climbed into the sky just beyond the edge of town. The blast wasn't large by military standards, but it didn't need to be. Windows rattled. A smell like burned plastic rolled over dry fields. Residents who had just relaxed stepped back from their windows, thinking, another hit. A 63-year-old engineer in San Jose stood in a control room staring at a cascade of red indicators across the grid display. He turned a key in a local panel out of habit, knowing it would not fix much. Somewhere above the usual noise, a small station out of San Diego pushed one clear line through the static. We lost central grid. The message lasted less than 3 seconds before cutting out. It was enough. The phrase jumped platforms, repeated by word of mouth, paraphrased in texts that arrived late or not at all. In Los Angeles, Bakersfield, Redding, people walked into grocery stores and headed straight for bottled water, even if they had never heard the station. Carts filled fast. Shelves emptied faster. No one argued. They simply watched what the person ahead of them was doing and did the same. Traffic patterns across both states began to resemble an arrhythmic heartbeat. In Virginia, highway noise rose to a continuous roar, then dropped as more drivers shut engines off in place. In California, major routes flickered between motion and near standstill as vehicles crowded on ramps and then hesitated at the sight of smoke on distant hills. Overhead, occasional flights crossed the dimming sky, their navigation lights the only steady points in a landscape losing its rhythm. On the ground, queues stretched past corners and down blocks. People stood in them not because they knew what came next, but because in a country where coordinates had failed, following the line was the last remaining plan. Colorado slipped out of alignment quietly, the way a joint gives out before anyone notices the pain. While the coasts burned with noise and confusion, the mountains fell through silence. It began with missing signals, small gaps that widened into fractures no one could bridge fast enough. In Colorado Springs, civil defense stations watched their network fade square by square. Radios that should have chimed every minute went dark. Backup lines jammed with stray fragments, autonomous mode, NORAD offline, routing suspended. A 53-year-old man rummaged through his basement for batteries, shaking each one as if listening could tell him whether the world still worked. Along I-25, drivers hesitated more than they moved. Cars rested on shoulders with hazard lights blinking in slow, tired patterns. People leaned over radios that caught only static and the occasional clipped alert. When a faint vibration rolled through the air from the direction of Cheyenne Mountain, heads turned, seeking meaning in a tremor too soft to read. Denver dimmed early. Office towers lost floors like shutters closing one by one. Elevators halted mid-ride, forcing stairwells to fill with neighbors walking down in measured, slow steps. A 68-year-old woman stood in her dark bathroom, listening to a distant metallic throb. Then the old civil defense loudspeakers, installed during the 70s and forgotten, woke with a warped tone. Not a siren. Not a message. Just a stretched, uneven sound that froze entire blocks. Generators sputtered in mountain towns. 2 fire stations went fully dark, crews reverting to paper logs and handheld radios that caught more interference than speech. With official channels nearly silent, rumors hardened. A strike on the Front Range, drones overhead, NORAD severed from the grid. No confirmation arrived, and the absence of denial became its own kind of truth. Traffic toward higher elevations grew into a slow, shuffling exodus. Cars lined narrow mountain roads, spaced wherever gravity allowed. Families sat on hoods with flashlights pointed at the ground, speaking softly. Did you hear the second tone? Was that a jet? Do we move or wait? No one wanted to be the first to guess wrong. Downtown garages became gathering points. Groups arranged themselves around battery lanterns, their shadows stretching across cold concrete pillars. A 71-year-old retired officer traced an old regional map with his finger, remembering drills from decades earlier. Back then, the blackout always ended on command. This time there was no signal of any kind, only the slow erosion of systems that once seemed unbreakable. Highways across the foothills stalled into metallic rivers. Cars stopped nose to tail, identical in their stillness. Above them, something moved, a heavy, distant rumble, smooth and continuous. Too high to identify, too steady to ignore. People lowered their heads instinctively, waiting for a second impact that never arrived. Then, from deep in a valley west of the city, a long, uneven resonance spread through the night. Not an explosion, more like pressure shifting through the mountains. Porch lights flickered once, went out, and didn't return. Colorado did not fall through force. It fell through silence, through the widening gap between signals, between warnings, between what people knew and what they could no longer confirm. And in that silence, the country understood it had crossed into a new stage of collapse, one where stillness itself carried the threat. New York's fall didn't come as an explosion. It came as pressure, slow, crushing, and unmistakable. By the time the fourth state slipped, the city felt like a sealed container, every sound bouncing off its own walls. The scale that once protected it now trapped it. The first break was transit. At the height of the evening rush, several subway control hubs lost coordination. Trains halted between stations, lights flickered, and a wave of confused silence rolled through tunnels. When doors finally opened, thousands began walking along the tracks, flashlights shaking in their hands. The tunnels filled with echoing footsteps, a long metallic whisper of bodies moving through darkness. Above ground, bridges turned into human rivers. The Brooklyn and Manhattan spans carried streams of people who weren't evacuating so much as escaping the sensation of being enclosed. Many didn't know where they were going, only that forward felt safer than stillness. A 57-year-old father in Queens lifted his daughter onto his shoulders to help her breathe above the crowd. A 50-year-old bus driver leaned against his stalled vehicle near Delancey, listening to a pocket radio spit out fragments: power, priority, hold position. In hospitals across Long Island, generators hummed unevenly, throwing pale light onto crowded hallways. Ambulances tried to transfer patients to more stable facilities, but the roads were locked, solid lines of cars stuck nose to tail, horns muted by collective fear. Inside triage tents, nurses held phones to windows hoping for a signal that never appeared. Then came a spark of misinformation. A small local station, silent for hours, suddenly broadcast a single phrase: "Bridge access suspended." The message faded instantly, but it was enough. Within minutes, thousands surged toward crossings, convinced closures were permanent. The movement wasn't frantic. It was tight, breathless, determined, a migration driven by instinct rather than instruction. The city's soundscape shifted. The deep hum of traffic dissolved into the uneven shuffle of millions of shoes. In subway corridors, people descended with phone screens held high, their glow painting the walls in pale rectangles. A 68-year-old woman in a passageway near Penn Station held a bag of medicine against her chest, whispering directions she wasn't sure were correct. From above, Manhattan resembled a dark island with only a few glowing arteries, bridges lit by handheld lights, waterfronts flickering under emergency lamps. Movement pulsed through the grid like a heartbeat beating too fast. Entire neighborhoods dimmed at once as residents switched breakers off, hoping darkness meant safety. Every sound from the sky sent a ripple through the city. A distant rumble, jet or thunder, made thousands pause. A low mechanical groan from the East River tunnels tightened shoulders across several blocks. People clung together not out of affection but calibration. If they stay, I stay. The atmosphere thickened with heat from packed sidewalks and the sharp scent of overworked asphalt. The Hudson murmured beneath the bridges, its rhythmic slap carrying farther than usual in the absence of engines. The city felt smaller, tighter, like lungs reduced to half capacity. Then, under a sky lit only by phones and scattered generators, a new fragment pierced the noise. Central corridor compromised. The words were incomplete, but the meaning was clear enough. What had fallen before would fall again. And the country, listening through the dark, understood the collapse had not reached its end. Texas didn't break at once. It weakened in long, uneven breaths, like a system losing pressure faster than it could recover. By the time it became the fifth state to fail, the collapse felt stretched, slow enough to watch, fast enough to outrun every attempt at control. The first failures came from the grid. Substations around Houston, Dallas, and Waco flickered in irregular patterns, triggering rolling brownouts that moved unpredictably across entire counties. Streetlights dimmed, surged, then died. People stepped onto porches, listening to the faint metallic pops of overloaded transformers. No one knew if the threat was an attack or simply exhaustion in aging infrastructure. Highways filled before sunrise. I-10 and I-35 clogged with cars moving a few feet at a time. A 52-year-old fuel truck driver stood beside his tanker near San Marcos, watching a line of vehicles bend around the station and out of sight. Drivers waited with engines off, hands on doors, eyes fixed on the pump lights that blinked uncertainly. Conversations were brief, mostly questions without answers. Pharmacies experienced their own wave of pressure. Handwritten signs, Limit 1, appeared on windows. A 46-year-old medical worker in Dallas held a powerless radio against her chest as she waited for her turn, listening more to the crowd's breathing than to any news. People swapped fragments of rumors, ports shut down, refineries offline, the grid splitting into isolated islands. Then the sirens in Houston misfired. Not an order, just a malfunction. But the sharp, rising tones carried across several districts, and thousands reacted instantly. Some ran for shelters, others jumped into stalled traffic, trying to get inland. The resulting surge locked major intersections, pinning ambulances and supply trucks in place. The sound alone had done the damage. A second spark came from an AM broadcast, Spanish, thin and distorted. Zona cerrada, evacuation partial. Intended for one industrial block, it spread through neighborhoods as the interstate is closing and the coast is being cleared. Within minutes, new streams of vehicles poured onto I-10, headlights forming a white ribbon stretching across the darkening plain. From above, Texas looked fractured, vast dark regions cut by narrow, glowing highways. Ports in Houston and Corpus Christi stalled as logistics networks lost contact with central systems. Warehouse yards filled with parked trucks, drivers leaning against doors, waiting for instructions that never returned. A 64-year-old woman in San Antonio handed bottles from her emergency reserve to neighbors gathered in a driveway. Nearby, someone turned a small radio in slow increments, catching only sharp static and a few clipped phrases: grid overload, reroute, unverified. Crowds moved with a strange, synchronized caution, slow, deliberate, as if the air itself were heavy. On overpasses, people paused to listen for anything beyond the wind and distant transformer pops. Panic wasn't fast, it was dense, like a pressure that settled into every motion. By dusk, I-35 resembled a frozen river of metal. Cars stood motionless in every lane. Some drivers sat on their roofs, others walked the shoulder, scanning the horizon for lights or jets or sirens, any sign of what came next. Then a new fragment cut through the static, faint and trembling. Remaining states, next condition. The signal died. No follow-up. Just the thick silence of a state that realized it had crossed the threshold, and that others would, soon enough, follow. The center of the country felt the weight of the fall before it understood its shape. With 5 states already slipping into silence, the plains entered a different kind of crisis, one defined not by motion, but by stillness. The night air over Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa carried no sirens, no explosions, only the low hum of systems trying to stay alive. In towns across the region, people gathered around radios the way earlier generations gathered around fire. Garages with open doors became listening posts. Folding chairs scraped across concrete. A 71-year-old man in Kansas adjusted the dial of a radio older than his grandson, catching only faint breaths of speech. Systems, adjusting. The words stretched thin, more like exhalations than news. Traffic thinned to almost nothing. Not because roads were safe, but because people refused to risk unnecessary motion. Streets emptied. Farmhouses glowed with a single candle or battery lamp. A 59-year-old woman in Nebraska wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, sitting near the doorway as if expecting someone to arrive with news. Across from her, a 67-year-old neighbor whispered, "Maybe tomorrow," though her voice revealed she was speaking to keep fear from taking the room. Then came the official update, brief, sterile, unresolved. Nationwide systems adjusting. Nothing after it. No guidance. No reassurance. And that absence became its own verdict. The government was still standing, but not fully speaking. Later that night, several central states experienced a brief pulse of restored connectivity. Phones flickered alive for seconds at a time, enough to deliver half-formed reports of stabilization somewhere in the country. No location named. No confirmation. Hope rose and stalled in the same breath. In Iowa, streetlights across one city died at once. The blackout was expected. The reaction was not. Hundreds of people stopped walking mid-step. They stood under the sudden darkness, listening as if the night might speak. The wind tapped metal roofs. Gravel shifted under shoes. No one moved until someone far away shut a car door, and the sound allowed the rest to breathe again. From above, the heartland looked like a map with missing pieces. Large dark voids where states had once pulsed with light. Highways were thin silver traces. Towns were faint glimmers floating in wide black fields. In a country built on motion, the greatest shift was the absence of it. The final sound came just before dawn, a low, steady tone on several radio bands, followed by a voice, calm, distant, unplaceable. The situation is changing. No further explanation. Only the slow return of static, as if the future itself had spoken once, then stepped back into the dark.